Okay, hello everybody again. Welcome 469ers. This is the bonus for the bonus session. So hopefully you have enjoyed everything we've done thus far. I felt that I owed everybody this one. Obviously, we've kind of gotten some of the bugs worked out over the course of time. We've perfected some of the techniques, and we have an opportunity now to make a nice clean recording of one of those very special secret places. And you folks know that we've been in some darn nice secret places over time. We attempted to start out here with our second session, and the technology gremlins got a hold of us, and I know that it turned out a lot less than perfect. I'm not sure how many of you folks have actually viewed that particular segment. I could barely go back and look at it myself, but we did have requests from some of you folks to come back and meet with my friend Jim Mathias, who's the owner of this wonderful building. And the secret place, of course, where we are right now is the basement of the 1819 Halfpenny House at 100 Market Street in Lewisburg. It's been some weeks, so maybe you've forgotten about the outside. We'll do that in the end. But this is a building that has a fantastic history, and Jim knows it really well. And I'm going to turn it over to him and let him tell a history. I was telling Jim before we even opened up, he's wondering when I'm going to leave him start talking. But if you folks recall, 2 sessions back when we went to the Do House, our host, Bruce Teeple, was very emphatic about explaining the evolution, the living aspects of the house over the many decades. In the case of the Do House and this house as well, there are literally centuries. And not only were there many transformations done physically to these buildings over that period of time, but there have been many, many different uses. Sometimes the changing uses have dictated the need to reconfigure these buildings. Jim is going to tell us about that. It's remarkable in this specific instance. But we're down here in the basement of the 1819 building. I think I'll let Jim tell the story, then we'll point out a few of these things. Some of them actually lead into the story that Jim will tell. So Jim, thank you very much for having us back.
It's wonderful to be back.
Yeah.
And hello everybody out there. And yeah, I know we tried hard that last time. I think the wind and the weather and the technical gremlins got us. But welcome back. This property, as you've been told, goes back to 1819, and William Hayes was the gentleman that bought it and built this home. He was also a merchant and a postmaster, and the second postmaster of Lewisburg, and he ran a dry goods and grocery store business actually from 1804. So obviously at some other location. His father passed away in 1819. He ended up building this property. Well, you're familiar with it, I'm sure, but we'll go out and take a look at it. But it was a classic, beautiful 21-inch thick limestone structure built by German craftsmen back in the day. It really is, I think, one of the most prominent features of this particular house is this extraordinary masonry work. He built this house on a 42-foot wide parcel. He also had another parcel that became the store. And I'll give you a little personal story. That is that it was a grocery store back then. I don't know if it was built exactly at the same time, but it was a brick structure. It's now Sculpture's hair salon. And it was a dry goods and grocery store from very, very early times, as I mentioned. And I think what's unique about that is that as a kid, I remember coming to Milt Wagner's grocery store, which is where Sculptures is right now. That was the local place that my family went. I lived down on South Water Street until I was 7 years old. I remember the old plank floors, the pickle barrel. That place really went back in time. Milt was also the local bookie. So when you came in and you saw him talking on the phone, you didn't know whether he was taking a grocery order or taking a bet on a baseball game or the horse race. Anyway, he was quite a character. When Weiss Markets built in the lot, they cleared that lot before Kohl's Hardware was there. As soon as that store came in, I think some of the small local grocers kind of went out of business. So, but that's the story of the Hayes family. The next iteration of this story is the Halfpennies, and Mark Halfpenny was a woolen manufacturer. He made a lot of money selling blankets to the Union Army during the Civil War. He did that out of Laurelton, Pennsylvania, and there was a fire there, and after the Civil War was over, he moved to Lewisburg. He bought what is now the Street of Shops, and formerly Pennsylvania House Furniture. It was actually a mill there, but not a woolen mill. And he converted it to a woolen mill operation. It was pretty small to start with. It became probably the most significant industrial enterprise in Lewisburg at the time. It was well known for its quality, very successful. And during that time, the Halfpennies owned it. Another structure was built on the property. I'll show you where that might have been. It didn't last a long period of time. In the maps in 1924 does not show it, but that structure was significant, almost as big as this home. The Halfpennies ended up, after Mark Halfpenny died, and it went through a couple of estate transfers, it was then sold to KDR, Kappa Delta Rho Fraternity of Bucknell University, and it operated as a fraternity house here until 1943. After that, there was a sale, and a couple of other owners, short time, owned it, and then it was converted to an apartment house. And all along the way, we see these significant changes, and we'll show those to you on the outside. We really can't show you much on the inside because we have 5 current tenants here, and what we need to do is to show you kind of how we think things might have developed. There's some suppositions and all of that, but we can pretty much tell, I think, generally how the changes in this home went from a home and a commercial establishment to a major industrial family in Lewisburg owning it, to a fraternity, to an apartment house. And then, of course, the Fishers bought this in 1972, the year of the flood. They kept the apartments upstairs, and their family lived on the first floor, and they owned it for over 40 years. So all of those changes in ownership brought some major changes to this house. Some we know, some we don't know, but it's a pretty fascinating history, and it's a pretty amazing structure. So we're happy to be stewards of it.
Yeah. Jim, I'm thinking as we're standing down here, some of those features, those changes that you've talked about, we're going to get up here in a second.
Okay.
Jim just informed me of something outside, that through all of those transformations from this grand single family home of Mr. Hayes originally, and then the Halfpenny family, and from thenceforth, after the conversions to the fraternity house and the apartments, things as drastic as the stairways have been taken out. Jim told me a little bit ago, he's intimately familiar with literally the bowels of this building, having been into every crevice, and still it's very difficult to tell exactly how it's been altered over time, isn't it?
It is difficult. And the other thing that happened, that as someone who's been involved a little bit in construction for a long time, in the early 50s, I think it was maybe one of the first laminate paneling that came out, like a masonite paneling with a very hard surface made to look like a rough plaster finish.
Right.
They sheathed every wall in this building with that, every single interior wall. So it's tough.
New material.
It is tough as hell. It shatters when you try to take it off, because we had to do some of those kinds of renovations. It doesn't patch particularly well. It's easy to patch if you just kind of make it look like you don't know what you're doing. It ends up looking better than if you try to make it right. So at any rate, that covered up all of what I would consider to be some of the telltale signs of where things might have been.
I understand.
You sometimes you can see it in the ceiling, sometimes you can see it in the walls, that there was a doorway here, there was a window here, or there was something happened in the ceiling.
Right.
You can't see any of that. And looking at the floor that has probably been replaced as well,
sure,
it's hard to figure out where stuff was.
It really is. And when apartmentization took place on large buildings, particularly in that area. Now, during the time when the fraternity was here, 27 to 43, I would conjecture that there probably were not a lot of changes made to the actual configuration of the building. Would you?
I think that's what we surmise as well. When we did some work on the third floor and we got up above the ceiling, we could see what actually existed there before. And the roof had been changed, and we'll talk about that when we get outside, but it slopes down to about 7-foot height on the ends of the third floor. But it originally went up to slanted and then flattened out a ceiling. And that flattened out ceiling towards the peak of the roof was 12, 13 feet high.
Wow.
So that's what I think Halfpenny built. And what happened then was that's probably as a fraternity that was probably used as a double or triple bunk. Bunk room.
Sure.
That there was communal sleeping on the third floor. They used the second floor for studying, and the first floor was used for social and dining spaces. And that's how I think it was probably used.
Arranged, yes. Like I was saying a moment ago, and please correct me if you have different thoughts on this. I mean, I've dealt with some of these other buildings personally, and at this level, I've looked at them that were, I say, apartmentized at a relatively early point in time. And there was not a lot of sensitivity. The people who were responsible for the apartmentization just knew that there was a lot of square footage, and they just put in spaces for spaces.
And I agree with that, because the big change in this property that I think happened is not only the wall coverings, but when they made 4 one-bedroom apartments out of that second and third floor, and they had to get bathrooms into those spaces, and they had to get the stairways and the exit areas, and when all of that had to be worked out, sometimes they were very clever about it, and sometimes, I mean, we took a look at a lot of things and just said, "Wow, what do we have to do to kind of make this much more livable and much more modern?"
Absolutely.
So we converted closets into showers and around here you can see gas regulators, and you can see new plumbing and water manifold. That all went up an area that I think was probably an old stairwell. Because we used it as a chase to get all this stuff up there, because it all had to be replaced.
Absolutely. Well, we're down here still, and once again, not really knowing exactly what our members saw the first time around. Brian, just pan around a little bit on some of the structural members, which are nothing shy of remarkable, and again, diagnostic of that period of construction. I'm referring to the first quarter of the 19th century. You've got the hand-hewn beams, very, very substantial size. The posts, the vertical members, Jim and I have talked about those before. Those probably largely have been replaced with similar members over time, simply because they rotted away. Obviously, the basement floor would have been turned to cement. I think before, and Jim and I have talked about, and we love this feature as well, the bases of the fireplaces. There are 4 of them. They carried probably 4 fireplaces on each side of the house. So you can see how massive they are. And unlike the ones at the Priestley, remember I showed you those stylistic differences? These are the trabeated style. They actually look like fireplaces down here in the basement, but they are not. They are simply squared off with the lintel above, and all that weight from those chimneys is carried from above. There are other stories down here, Jim, that I want you to tell about this. We talked about the fraternity that came in 1927 until 1943. So we can learn something about that fraternity down here.
KDR is actually no longer at Bucknell University, so this is part of their history. And here's my supposition about all this. In 1943, there probably weren't a lot of new underclassmen coming into Bucknell, and certainly not a lot of potential members of fraternities. If there were 10 fraternities, they were probably already fighting for a couple of pledges. So Bud and Harry and Bob, classes of 43 and 44. Here's my guess. My guess is that they have been the last 3 members of the KDR fraternity in this place, because 43 was when it was sold. So they had a couple of sophomore and juniors, and said, we're not going to keep this place open for 3 people in 1943, the war was, it was not known when it was going to be over.
That's right.
So anyway, but I think that they probably got their eviction notices and came down here and inscribed their names in history.
More than likely. They, as you pointed out to me, these were probably their projected graduation years, but who knows, they possibly had to ship out.
Well, if it was sold in 43, I guarantee the 44 guys had their last Bucknell experience in the fraternity someplace else.
Yeah, boy, that's a good story about the brothers having inscribed their names down here. I keep looking, Jim, at the structural members and then attempting to relate to the things that you said have been changed over time. I know we've commented on the joists themselves. The timbers were so massive that for some reason, totally unbeknownst to us, they were actually placed on their side. They weren't stood on their jack edges, which would have been a traditional way to frame a house. That would have been the stronger. But in this specific instance, these timbers were just so strong, it didn't matter if they were on their sides or standing on their edges, right,
Yeah, I
Jim?
think if you take a 5 or 6 by 8 and span it over 6 feet, 2 feet apart, I think you could probably get away with an awful lot. But yeah, it's unusual to see everything like this laid on its side, because you're saving a couple inches, that's about it.
Absolutely. And of course the boards, the floorboards that you see there, they're actually subflooring to whatever is above there now, which, as Jim has pointed out, has probably been changed. But these boards that we see, just the lower side of the floorboards, I should say, in many cases, they may in fact be original. Some have been changed because, as Jim pointed out, when the building has been reconfigured, particularly in early apartmentization, there were floors that were having to have been taken out. Remember, this was a building that was way pre-electrification, way before central water, and certainly before plumbing, or before sewage rather. If you'll recall from our past sessions, I did point out that electricity came to Lewisburg in 1911, all 2,300 volts of it. So this place and it's just a few blocks from here was the substation. So there may have been a meager amount of electricity that would have made its way up here in those early years in the 1900s, just for a few lights. Certainly not for cooking, refrigeration, or any of those sorts of things. Likewise, the water, if you folks will recall, we left off at the water tower bases last week. The water company, the public water company, was established in 1883, and the bases of the towers we included in our last session. So here we are, only one block, effectively, just a little over a block from the pumping station. So it's very likely that as the early water system was put to Lewisburg, that this would have been a recipient. Something I think Jim probably knows this as well. When I was researching the genesis of the water company before, Mr. Halfpenny was also instrumental in the water company, as with certain other enterprises around town. He was very influential in those things. And just one other thing while I'm thinking about utilities, Jim and I talked about this as well before. Sewage did not come to Lewisburg until 1927. So likewise, this would have been probably an early building to have gotten sewage. That would have been just prior to the fraternity house when we think about it. Prior to that, there would have been privies in the backyard. That is, those would have been the bathrooms up until that point in time. And Jim had also pointed out, I don't think it came through on our prior film, but there is another area behind that bricked area. That would be on the south elevation on the Market Street side, and we're not exactly sure. Naturally, there are stories and legends that abound as to what uses may have taken place in those secret compartments on the north side of that wall. Effectively, they would be out there. This, before you continue with your story, this little vault, I call it a vault over here, Jim, where you come in off the street.
Right.
Something like that would have probably very likely been original to a building like this,
Yeah.
don't you think?
I think so.
I think so. And there's another interior staircase. Go on with your story, Jim. Do you want to go out, or do you have some more down here?
Well, I guess the only thing I wanted to add, because of a small town like Lewisburg always has those connections, is it's interesting that the Halfpennies bought this from the Hayes.
Yes.
And the other thing is that the Halfpennies bought the mill, and James Hayes, the youngest son of William Hayes, the guy who built it, was in this house. His brother Tom was a part owner in the mill operation the Halfpenny bought down on the river.
I see.
So there's these kind of connections of multiple transactions,
Yeah.
both business and private related,
Right.
between the Hayes and the Halfpennies, and I just find those kind of connections really interesting.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Did I read in some of the information which you provided me, Jim, that when Mr. Halfpenny began his woolen business, which he brought from Laurelton,
Yeah.
out in the west end of Union County, is there some possibility that he would have actually been conducting some operations in this house?
I actually thought that might have been a possibility, and with not knowing what the longevity of the grocery business, and if he bought that as part of the property from Hayes, and it wasn't operating as William Hayes went out of that business in 1824,
right.
But who knows what? I don't have any information about what would have happened there, nor have I been able to find anything. They had what looked like what we would consider a retail kind of operation down at the mill. There was a building there that I think sold some of those things. Because remember, he made blankets for the Union Army, but after he started this mill, which was at the time quite an advanced operation.
Yes.
He was making jackets, he was making jeans, and a whole bunch of other things. And actually, the interesting that I think Mayor Wagner did a little description of Halfpenny's Lewisburg woolen mills, and apparently a lot of the wool came from Canada. So this was some local, but a lot from Canada. So it had a pretty wide regional reach, and he was very successful for decades.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
Yeah, all from here. Let's go out through the little vaultway onto the Front Street elevation, and we'll pick up where we had left off a couple of weeks ago. Show you a few of the architectural features on the outside. And Jim's story also continues out here relative to the evolution of the property and the buildings on site and so on. So we're back out, we're on the Front Street side. We're effectively a block from the river. Give the orientation, Brian, as to where we are on Market Street. Remember, at the time the house was built, there was actually a house right there where you see those vehicles coming off of the bridge approach. That was the toll house. That was since relocated down to North Water Street. At some point we may even get a shot of it. It's not, architecturally it's not very remarkable. But that was the toll house for the original bridge. And of course this was the old area of town. This was in Ludwig Durr's original plat, if you'll recall. Jim has told me the number of this lot. It doesn't really make any difference, but it was definitely one of the lots, or two of the lots, that were platted originally. Brian, it's nice and quiet. We might just take a quick shot over there, because I'd like our folks to see this building again. It's so nice from the front. So now we're on the opposite side of the street. I just want you to appreciate the grandeur of this building. As Jim was saying, these are limestone blocks. These were not picked out of the fields. These were cut out of those ledges and those ancient quarries that I've talked about before. And when Mr. Halfpenny built this, this was 2.5 stories.
Well, when Hayes bought it. Well, yeah, I think it was described as 2 stories, but I think that if we look at this and we see the 3rd story windows, those windows sit on top of the limestone wall as it was originally built.
I see.
So the roof line would have started at the top of that limestone,
right?
And so the roof was literally raised
by a full story,
right? And so if we envision this house, take away the porch,
right?
Take away that door, because that door was probably a window.
Okay.
And take away that those windows and the kind of fenestration up there, and that's what this old original, I think
so too.
I think that's what this old original federal style building would have looked like.
Absolutely.
So It's interesting to take a look at Sculpture Studio because now we have to think about this. Would have been the brick edition, and once again, I'm not sure whether this was raised as well when the other one was done. I don't know that, but I know that this was a brick edition. It was the dry goods and grocery operation for Hayes back in the early 1800s. At various times, there were other buildings kind of attached to the back of this, and there was actually a front porch to this grocery store that came out onto the sidewalk. Wow. So there was, it very, very different. Obviously now it's been parged and painted. Right. This property was separated from the house in 1888 after Halfpenny's death. And the lot is 24 feet wide and goes all the way back, just like this, the main house does, to Cherry Alley.
Right. So it's about approximately 1/2 the width of the main house.
Correct.
Correct.
I think when it was built and how it was kind of attached to the original structure, I don't know. But I do know that. Very soon after this house was built, or maybe simultaneous with it, we had a commercial operation that was part of this property.
I understand. Jim, is there any evidence of connection between the buildings?
None.
No evidence of connection between the two. Yeah, not atypical at all. The chimneys on Jim's building obviously have been altered as well. There were probably originally giant stone or brick chimneys that went through on each end, correct? Yes. Probably single stack. Actually, they had multiple flues contained within them, but they may have looked as one masonry unit, sort of like the Fairweather house that we saw over on South Water Street. And as Jim pointed out, I think it's so interesting that for a period of 150 years at least, the area where Sculpture Studio is located now, that had been a mercantile establishment, and even into Jim's earlier days here in town, that was the grocery store.
The place to go.
That was the place to go.
For groceries and a quick bet.
There you go. The front porches over here, the Italianate bracketry and so on, all came later, probably we think maybe around the turn of the 20th century, late 1800s.
And my guess at some point in time, whether it was when the fraternity had it or whether it was apartmentized, is that window was converted to a door because they needed to have emergency egress.
I think it probably was. Let's go over. We'll walk around the back. If I stood over here, I would go on ad nauseum about the construction features. Remember the coin stones on the corners that we looked at the Dale Engel Walker House? I had shown you those in our previous segment here. Once again, the one that was bit fragged and that we were unable to get a good clean cut. But you can see those massive stones in the corners of the buildings. In this specific instance, they're not there necessarily for decorative purposes. The skilled masons at the time would have used those as the structural tie elements to tie the walls together. So now we're headed back down this north Front Street elevation to the rear. And actually, I think Jim wants to bring us over here where we can get a better shot of the house. Because as Jim's story continues about the evolution, both of the structural evolution and the evolution of the uses of the house. Perfect spot once we get around here. So, Jim, before you go on with the story, I do see that transition that you're talking about in the upper end of the house, yes, where the additional story was actually put on. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, obviously to put in the windows, they had to kind of remove stone, right?
Yes.
And filled it in with brick.
Right.
They, all the way around the outside of the house in the third floor apartments, we have these, little kind of knee walls that are just a couple feet high.
Yes.
Where they've just put wood over top of cap the block, and then we got those short windows, and it's a ceiling that that probably is about 7 feet, and it just they curved it up to maybe 8, and then maybe 8 and a little bit, 8.5, something like that. So anyway, it's really unusual.
To create the whole other story.
That's
right. When if you folks, if you can just envision, as Jim was saying, from that very massive cornice work that we saw from the front, and we'll see it from the rear as well. And that's where those big giant scroll brackets are. If you can just envision the top of that, the perfectly horizontal line in the limestones, and that would have been the top sill or the top plate on the house, and then there would have been a combed or a gabled roof that would have sat atop that and would have been about the same. We don't know. Could have been a steeper roof. We really don't know. This roof the current roof has a fairly shallow pitch to it, and that was put on there to achieve as much headroom as possible on that 3rd floor. Before we move around, also another feature that we looked at the Dew House a couple of weeks ago, those beautiful jack arches that are created atop the windows on this side. See them, the stones are perfectly cut with a little bit of a taper to them. Those are the voussoirs, and those were very high style at that time. They were used for a stylish effect, stylish Lewisburg, right? Okay, what about the rest of this stuff on the back here?
I think, what's helpful to understand about this building now is that door where the 100 Market and the apartment numbers are, that's the only way to get upstairs at this point in time. So you would go up and you can see that, another half story has been added for that stairwell. You get up to the 2nd floor and come into the building. There are apartment doors immediately on your right and left. And then the stairs go up towards the center of the building to the landing for the 3rd floor.
I say.
And again, up doors left and right to the apartments on either side.
Right.
But then there's another staircase that goes down, and that goes down to that door we saw from the front as the fire escape.
Emergency.
So that's what we're left with now in terms of staircase access.
Isn't that something?
And that's the only way. Now I have seen some drawings of this building, some renderings and sketches that had this same kind of arrangement, but in a 2-story, maybe slightly wider addition that went up and obviously enclosed some kind of access into the 2nd floor. So that goes back to the late 1800s. So, but what I do know is you take a look at all of these structures added to the back of the original building. They have changed a bunch. They had been brick and now they're block. They had been framed, but then they were torn down and reconfigured. It could have been a kitchen, a shed, a summer kitchen, a privy, a garage, whatever it was. These attached structures changed certainly a lot over 200 years.
Jim, in the long history of this house, given the grandeur of the thing originally, those other neat little things that you're talking about, let's call them dependency buildings in the back, there could very likely have been a selection of those. I mean, maybe at one point even, a bake oven, as Jim said, a summer kitchen, a cooking kitchen, could have been completely detached from the main building. Privies, to be sure.
Yeah.
There were definitely privies here, and there may have been other ancillary buildings as well. What about the more substantial buildings, Jim, that you know about that were to the north?
One more thing about this, and that is that there is a basement structure, not the space that we were in, that starts at the end of the original structure. There is a basement, and I believe that the stonework in there is original or very, very close to original. So something in brick or something substantial may have been
at the same time as the house?
At the same time as the house, or very soon thereafter, might have been a part of this. And
very likely the kitchen part.
And the kitchen part, they want to separate that from the
main function.
About everything burned down here at one time or another in Lewisburg, it seems.
Right.
And I'm sure they were very cautious of that.
Sure.
But anyway, if you want to walk down this way.
Of course.
I mentioned that the Halfpennies built another structure on this lot, and indeed, I've seen, you don't see it in 1868 immediately when the Halfpennies owned it, but you do see it in the 1880s that there is a house at the end of the lot. So this house that was built on this lot was almost the same mass and size as this structure and all of its dependent buildings.
Inconceivable.
When I was looking at some of the renderings, it appeared to me as if there was maybe only 10 or 12 feet between the structures coming from this house and the structures coming from this house. We know that it was a frame structure. We just mentioned fire. It wasn't here in 1927 when the fraternity bought it. It was not on the maps anymore. So we could surmise that a house that was probably only built in the late 1800s that didn't survive into 1920 may have been the victim of a fire. But we don't know, but we do know looking at this, and I've dug a lot back here, landscaping and so forth, and pulling out rocks, and there's just no sign of anything.
Isn't that
right?
something?
It really is.
Considering how substantial these buildings were. I mean, I'm referring to this other house back here.
Well, this was I don't know if it was a full 3-story, but it was certainly a 2.5 story. There could have been significant attic space and a lot of other buildings attached to it, like 2 or 3. It was like, and how did they size down?
Yes.
That's what was here, and that came out to where we were standing.
My God.
Mm-hmm. So it was something.
Yeah. And to think that it was all gone. Everything, I mean, this has been essentially cleared out back here for almost another 100 years. Like you said, prior to after 1927, this is being shown as pretty much a vacant area back here.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That is correct. And just like this property, the part next door that was separated in 1988 or 1888 also had buildings in the back here, not a huge, it looks like it could have been more garage oriented than living quarters, but it also was pretty significant, gone through some pretty significant changes as well over the years. Yeah, it's just amazing in 200 years, everything that can happen. You've certainly done a lovely job back here. Do you utilize this for public or quasi-public purposes, or is this for your... We have not. We've only used it privately. Who knows? I think the outdoor space and related to commercial establishments is probably pretty important to people looking at things right now. This house has been a labor of love, but it's also an investment, and we're looking to create the highest value that we can for it, and we'll see what happens down the line.
Right. What about the garage itself? That's a much more modern structure.
Yeah, much more modern structure. Mm-hmm. It's certainly very helpful and useful, and it very well may have been that the Fishers put that on. I know that they did. They built this. They built the bar and did the brickwork and hardscaping. Charlie was a landscaper and a landscaping business. So the dogwoods and the crab apples and so forth, the birch, that was all kind of part of it. We have reconfigured some things here, but there was a lot to work with.
Wow. Had he done this brickwork and the cement?
Yeah, the cement. Again, it was they had some big old dogs that were back here, but they also entertained back here and used it a lot.
I think that this is a fascinating thing. I didn't realize that he had done that as well. Had actually created this nice. It's a masonry structure, and I guess you call it a bar, don't you? Yeah, with beautiful bluestones on top.
There's more pollen this year than I have ever seen in my entire 70 years in Lewisburg. It's thick.
It's thick on here.
You can't even. I don't think we're getting any sunlight through here because of all the pollen.
We really didn't get into too much contemporary architecture in the course of the last few sessions, or in any of our sessions for that matter. But this wonderful roof structure, Jim was responsible for this within the last couple of years. Beautiful lightweight aluminum framing with is that a polycarbonate?
Polycarbonate panels. They're pretty. Once you get them in there, they're really, really strong, and I like it because it allows some infused light to come through.
Yes.
And so it's not dark, but it really does provide a little shelter from the storm.
That's right. You know, here in Lewisburg, I mean, all these wonderful contemporary things done sensitively, they've all got their place, and Jim has contributed mightily to this property, the aesthetic, and like he said, enhancing the value of it as well with an addition like this wonderful roof. It's just so unobtrusive and yet so functional. Wonderful garden. Thank you.
You bet.
So do we have some other stories, or do you think we've pretty well told it about
I
this?
think I've told all the stories I know, and now I'd start to be telling lies if I told any.
You know, I started out this course saying that what we didn't know we would make up as we went along, but boy, we've got such good documentation on so many things. And when you consider the history of these buildings spans so many decades, literally centuries, it's really, really difficult to surmise every single thing.
Well, I think
a lot of fun trying.
So you know, Union County didn't exist until 1813. Is that right?
That's correct.
And
1813.
And the county seat was in New Berlin until the 1840s. So when we did the transaction to purchase the property, I asked the aggregator to give me a little bit more historical research than the things that they would normally just need to do a financial transaction, which he did.
Yes.
But and these handwritten deeds and land grants that go back into the 1780s and 1790s, this property was conveyed and built in 1819. The records for it are still back in Northumberland County.
That's right.
So even though Union County was formed 6 years before that, they didn't keep those records. So my guess is that they weren't quite prepared to transfer all of that record keeping and transcription to New Berlin.
That's right.
At the time.
That's
so
right.
finding all this stuff, and then you go into the 1880s, and some of the copies of the deeds are unreadable.
Yeah.
They're just so it really is a guessing game, and so you really do have to. It's one part real research, and another part just kind of trying to fill in the blanks.
It sure is. Absolutely.
But that makes it fun.
It's a lot of fun, yeah. Well, that's really been enjoyable being here with you. I'm glad we got to do this, and I know that our members are going to enjoy it because as we have told them about up and coming video clips that in the form of recordings, I think they've been anxious to see them, and they're going to see this one.
Wonderful.
So, yes.
I've enjoyed it.
Thank you ever so much.
You betcha.
It's a pleasure. Yeah, we'll let you get to your thing, and we're going to call it a wrap.